ruthless biker sneered at a wheelchair-bound black veteran over a simple misunderstanding, but he had no clue that Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson was standing nearby, listening to every word. The cold air bit at his hands as Henry Parker, a 74-year-old Vietnam War veteran, maneuvered his wheelchair along the quiet residential streets. He was heading toward the gas station, his movements slow but steady, carefully managing the ALS that had confined him to this chair. The degenerative nerve disease had taken its toll, making even the simplest trips feel like a battle, but Henry had fought through worse before. Wrapped in a thick leather jacket, he pushed forward against the crisp autumn breeze, the scent of fallen leaves and the promise of colder days lingering in the air. Life had changed drastically since his wife passed and his diagnosis set in, but Henry refused to let it break him. One day at a time, he murmured, a quiet mantra that kept him moving forward. What used to be a simple errand, grabbing some medication, had now become a test of endurance. But he wasn't the type to back down. He had survived Vietnam. He had survived grief. He would survive this, too. As he neared the gas station, his eyes locked onto the entrance, the swing doors posing yet another challenge. He reached out, his hands trembling slightly as he pushed. The door resisted. He let out a soft grunt, mustering more strength. Come on now, he urged himself, giving it one final shove. It gave way just enough for him to maneuver inside. The cool air of the convenience store washed over him, a stark contrast to the autumn chill outside. Morning, Mr. Parker, called out Tom, the young cashier who had grown used to Henry's regular visits. Morning, Tom, Henry replied with a nod, his voice carrying a warmth that made even the smallest interactions feel meaningful. Navigating the aisles, he steered toward the pharmaceutical section, scanning the shelves until he spotted what he needed, his anti-inflammatory ointment, a small but crucial tool in managing the relentless muscle stiffness. Without it, even the simplest movements became agonizing. Stretching his arm upward, he grasped the small tube, his hand shaking slightly. Victory. At the register, Tom rang up the purchase. Beep. The price flashed on the screen, $5. Henry reached for his wallet, only to realize it wasn't there. His heart sank. Ah, lucky me and my aging memory, he muttered, patting down his jacket and pants pockets, hoping to scrape together enough change. Tom watched as Henry fished out coins, counting carefully. Relief flickered across the veteran's face when he found just enough. I've got it, Henry said, offering the handful of change, along with his veteran ID. Tom smiled. Don't forget your veteran discount, Mr. Parker. The discount knocked the price down to $4, leaving Henry with an extra $1. He glanced over at the coffee machine, the rich aroma calling to him. Well now, he mused, I think I'll treat myself to a small coffee. Make the trip home a little sweeter. As Tom prepared the coffee, Henry struck up a conversation. Even with all his hardships, he had a way of making others feel at ease. You know, Tom, he began, his voice tinged with the wisdom of a man who had spent many years in solitude, I'm grateful this store is just half a mile away. Makes it possible for me to wheel myself over when I need something. When you live alone, it's the little things like this that make all the difference. Tom nodded, half listening as he rang up another customer. But Henry, as always, kept his warm demeanor, unfazed by the young man's distracted response. It's not easy, managing on my own with this ALS, Henry continued, his tone matter of fact, never one to seek pity. But I make do. Having this store close by? It's a blessing. Tom handed him the steaming cup of coffee, and Henry accepted it with genuine gratitude. Thank you, son. What Henry didn't know was that his quiet morning was about to take a dramatic turn. Because just outside the store, a ruthless biker was about to make a cruel mistake, and standing just a few feet away, The Rock was watching everything unfold. A ruthless biker mocked a wheelchair-bound black veteran over a simple misunderstanding, but what he didn't realize was that Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson was standing just feet away, and he had heard everything. Henry Parker took a slow sip of his hot coffee, letting out a sigh as the warmth spread through him. It was a small moment of comfort, something to break up the routine of his days. Carefully, he maneuvered his wheelchair toward the exit, balancing the cup in one hand as he pushed the door with the other. A simple errand. A small victory. Medication in his lap, a hot coffee in hand, proof that even with his limitations, he could still enjoy life's little moments. But then, fate intervened. Just as Henry struggled with the heavy door, a biker, also carrying a coffee, rounded the corner at full speed. They collided. The impact was instant. Both cups tumbled, their steaming contents splattering across the floor, soaking into Henry's lap. Ah! Henry gasped, his breath hitching as the burning liquid seeped into his trousers. He fumbled for his handkerchief, trying to blot away the stinging heat, but before he could fully process what had happened, a voice, sharp, aggressive, cut through his disoriented thoughts like a knife. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Henry looked up. A broad-shouldered man towered over him, his face twisted in fury. Muscular, clad in a leather vest with a biker gang emblem stamped on the chest, the man's presence was as intimidating as his voice. "You should watch where you're going," he barked. "Can't you just push the damn door or move aside? Or is that too much to expect from people like you?" Henry's heart clenched. He had heard that tone before. That exact tone. He had faced it in the past, on buses, in stores, in moments just like this, where his mere existence seemed to be an inconvenience to others. I'm sorry," he said, keeping his voice steady despite the pain and humiliation. "It was an accident. I didn't mean to." "Didn't mean to," the biker sneered. "Well, your accident just cost me my coffee." He folded his arms. "So, guess what? You're paying for it." Henry's stomach sank. I don't have any more money," he admitted. "I spent my last dollar on my own coffee." The biker narrowed his eyes, his disbelief quickly turning to anger. "You expect me to believe that?" His fingers flexed over his vest as he adjusted it, making sure the gang emblem was on full display. Tom, the young cashier, glanced up from the counter. "Hey, everything okay over there?" he called out, sensing the growing tension. Several customers had begun to watch. A mother shielded her curious child from the unfolding scene. Two teenagers exchanged uneasy glances. "Hey, man, take it easy," someone muttered from the back of the store. But the biker wasn't interested in an audience. In a flash, he grabbed the handles of Henry's wheelchair and shoved him toward the exit. The wheels screeched against the tile. Henry protested, his frail arms trying to resist, but the man's brute strength was overwhelming. Outside, the crisp morning air did nothing to cool the heat of the moment. If anything, it only made the biker's rage more palpable. He wheeled Henry around the side of the building, away from prying eyes. Then his voice dropped lower. Darker. "Listen here, Grandpa," he growled, his fingers curling around Henry's jacket, yanking the elderly man forward with brutal force. "I want my $3.50 for that coffee. And I want it now." Henry winced as the pressure on his shoulders increased. "Please," he said, voice strained. "I'm telling you the truth. I forgot my wallet at home. I only had enough for my medication and a small coffee. I swear." The biker scoffed. "Yeah? Well, I don't believe you." His fingers tightened. "You think I won't strip you down if I have to?" He sneered, reaching for Henry's jacket zipper. Henry flinched as the man started yanking at his coat, his hands rough, invasive, searching his pockets as if he were some criminal. "Stop, please." Henry begged, his voice cracking, his dignity just as under attack as his body. "I'm a veteran. I served this country, show some respect." But respect was the last thing on the biker's mind. His fingers clawed at Henry's pockets, his grip tightening. Then, a voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Hey, what's going on here?" Deep. Commanding. Unmistakable. The biker froze. Henry turned his head. Emerging from the store entrance, broad shoulders squared, jaw clenched with barely restrained fury, was Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. The energy in the air shifted instantly. The biker's grip loosened. Recognition flickered in his eyes. He knew exactly who he was looking at. Dwayne's gaze moved between the two men, his nostrils flaring as he took in Henry's disheveled appearance, the way his jacket was half unzipped, the way he was still gripping the arms of his wheelchair like he was trying to anchor himself to something, anything. Dwayne's expression hardened. "Is there a problem here?" The biker hesitated, his bravado cracking. His fingers twitched like he was considering his next move. "This doesn't concern you, Dwayne Johnson," he muttered. But his voice had lost its fire. His body had lost its fight. Because standing in front of him, inches away, was a force, a man who had built his entire career on taking down bullies just like him. And from the look in Dwayne's eyes, the biker was about to learn a lesson he would never forget. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson just taught a ruthless biker a lesson he'll never forget. "When I see someone assaulting an elderly man, it becomes my concern," Dwayne Johnson said firmly, his tone sharp, leaving no room for debate. His eyes flicked to the biker's vest, noting the embroidered name. "Rick. That's your name, isn't it?" The biker tensed. His expression twisted with rage. He was outmatched, and he knew it. He sneered but took a step back, his bravado cracking. "Don't you dare mention my name," he spat, venom dripping from his words. Then, as a final act of defiance, he turned and delivered a spiteful kick to the wheel of Henry's wheelchair before storming off. The engine of his bike roared to life as he sped away, a cloud of dust billowing in his wake. The tension in the air slowly dissipated, but Henry remained frozen, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair as his mind tried to catch up with everything that had just happened. Dwayne turned to him, his expression softening. "Are you all right, sir?" Henry nodded, though his hands were still trembling slightly. "Just a little burn from the coffee," he admitted. "But I'll be fine. Thank you for stepping in. My name's Henry Parker." Dwayne gave a warm, reassuring nod. "Nice to meet you, Henry." He crouched beside the elderly man, carefully adjusting his jacket and taking in the coffee-stained fabric and the slightly crumpled medication box beside him. Henry waved it off with a small chuckle. "It's just a box, nothing to worry about." But Dwayne wasn't convinced. "Wait here," he said, his voice calm but firm. A moment later, he returned from inside the store, carrying a fresh cup of coffee and a small tube of burn ointment. Without a word, he handed the coffee to Henry and knelt beside him, carefully applying the cooling gel to his burned hands and arms. His touch was surprisingly gentle for a man of his size. "Make sure to apply some of this to your lap when you get home," he instructed, his voice steady but kind. Henry took a sip of the fresh coffee, letting the warmth ease the last of his tension. He looked up at Dwayne, his eyes filled with gratitude and a hint of disbelief. "I can't believe it. Is it really you?" he asked, his voice laced with awe. "You're The Rock, aren't you? The boxer? The actor?" Dwayne chuckled. "That's right. I'm here on a short break from a film shoot, just stopped in for a quick snack." Henry's face lit up with recognition and nostalgia. "My late wife and I, we were devoted fans. We watched all of your boxing matches together," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "They helped me cope with the PTSD after I came back from Vietnam." Dwayne's expression softened. He listened intently, genuinely moved. "I'm honored to hear that, Henry. Even after she passed, I kept watching your movies. It was like keeping a part of our tradition alive." Dwayne nodded, his respect evident. "Well, you've got another one to look forward to next year. We're filming it now." Henry smiled. "I'll be sure to remember this day when I watch it." Dwayne placed a firm but friendly hand on Henry's shoulder. "The honor is mine, sir. To serve and help a veteran like you, that's what real honor is about." Then, after a pause, he added, "Can I give you a ride home? It's the least I can do after all that." Henry considered the offer but shook his head politely. "I appreciate it, but if it's all the same to you, I'd like to enjoy the fresh air and this excellent coffee." It'll help me clear my head after all this excitement. Dwayne nodded in understanding. Of course. Take care, sir. And thank you for your service. Henry started wheeling away but turned back one last time. Thank you again, Dwayne. For everything. As he rolled down the sidewalk, the warmth of the coffee in his hands was a comforting reminder that kindness could come from the most unexpected places. But just as he was beginning to relax, a chill ran down his spine. The biker hadn't truly left. Just across the street, parked at the roadside near the intersection, was Rick. Watching. Waiting. A wave of unease settled over Henry. The half-mile journey home suddenly felt much longer. His mind raced through his options. The main road was safer, more people, more eyes, but also longer and more exposed. Then, he remembered the shortcut. A dirt path that cut through a more secluded area. He rarely used it. But today, it might be the better option. With a quiet sigh, Henry made his decision. He turned his wheelchair onto the narrow trail, moving deeper into the trees, hoping that he had just made the right choice. Little did he know. Rick wasn't done with him yet. This wasn't such a bad idea after all, Henry murmured to himself, taking another sip of his coffee as he wheeled along the secluded dirt path. Maybe I should take this way more often. The fresh air, the quiet rustling of leaves, the solitude, it was a balm to his frayed nerves. For the first time since the confrontation at the gas station, he allowed himself to breathe. But the peace didn't last. A sudden, thunderous roar shattered the silence. Henry's breath hitched. His heart lurched into his throat. He knew that sound. The aggressive rev of a motorcycle engine. Henry barely managed to will himself aside as the bike came barreling toward him, the coffee cup slipping from his grasp, shattering against the ground. The sudden movement nearly toppled his wheelchair, leaving him vulnerable on the narrow trail. The biker had come back. Rick. The same man who had humiliated him earlier. Well, look who we have here, Rick sneered, circling Henry on his motorcycle like a predator playing with its prey. Thought you could hide from me, old man? Henry gripped the armrests of his wheelchair so tightly his knuckles turned white. Please, he said, keeping his voice steady despite the creeping fear. I don't want any trouble. What do you want from me? Rick laughed coldly, the sound cutting through the quiet like a blade. Too late for that, he taunted. This is such a quiet road, isn't it? No one's here to save you this time. No celebrity bodyguards to hide behind now. Henry's gaze flickered toward the ground, where the remains of his spilled coffee had soaked into the dirt. Rick followed his line of sight, a wicked grin spreading across his face. And what a liar you are, old man, he muttered. Now you've got yourself a cup of coffee, but it's not gonna save you. Henry swallowed hard. The coffee was a gift from Mr. Johnson, he tried to explain. I told you, I don't have any more money. But Rick wasn't listening. Oh, so you're buddies with the big star now, huh? He revved his engine, the sound growling through the empty space around them. Well, let me tell you something, I'm dangerous. And you embarrassed me back there. Time to teach you a lesson. Before Henry could react, Rick spun his bike in a tight circle around him, kicking up a storm of dirt and gravel. Let's see what a little dust does to those old eyes, he jeered. Henry instinctively tried to wheel backward, but his movements were too slow. The dirt clouded the air, stinging his eyes, making them water. The more he wiped, the worse it got, his vision blurred, disoriented, leaving him vulnerable. And then, Rick struck. His hand shot out, clamping onto Henry's wrist, squeezing so tightly that Henry gasped in discomfort. What's this? Rick sneered, his gaze locking onto Henry's wedding ring. The gold band. The last tangible piece of Clara, his late wife. Looks valuable, Rick mused. Maybe this will cover the cost of my coffee, and then some. Henry's heart pounded. A cold wave of terror crashed over him. No, please, he pleaded, his voice shaking. It's my wedding ring. Why are you doing this to me? But Rick's eyes gleamed with greed. Oh, come on, he mocked. You're old. What do you need it for? Henry tightened his grip, trying to resist, but Rick was too strong. With a final, merciless tug, the ring slid from Henry's finger, leaving behind an aching, raw indentation. Henry stared at his bare hand, the ghost of the ring still imprinted on his skin. His chest felt hollow, as if Rick had ripped away a part of his soul. Tears welled in Henry's eyes, not from pain, but from the unbearable loss. Clara. Her laughter. Her hand in his. Their life together. Gone. And then, the sound of an approaching car. A deep rumbling engine. Rick stiffened. His grip on the ring tightened instinctively as he turned toward the noise. Henry followed his gaze. And to his utter astonishment, Dwayne Johnson emerged from the vehicle. The air shifted. Dwayne's face was a mask of controlled fury, his powerful frame moving with purpose as he strode toward them. His voice, low and unwavering, carried both authority and disappointment. I knew this would happen when I saw you lingering by the roadside earlier. Rick stiffened, his posture tensed, but he didn't back down. Instead, he smirked, holding the wedding ring between his fingers, tilting it under the sunlight. Well, if it isn't the big movie star again, he sneered. What? You think your fame gives you the right to interfere in other people's business? Dwayne's jaw clenched, but he held his composure. This isn't about fame, he said, voice firm. This is about doing what's right. That ring doesn't belong to you. Rick scoffed. Finders keepers. He grinned, taunting. What are you gonna do about it? Dwayne took a step forward. His massive frame loomed over Rick, the air around them thick with tension. And in that moment, Rick realized he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson faces down a ruthless biker gang, but what happens next will shock you. Dwayne Johnson stood tall, his broad frame casting an imposing shadow as he locked eyes with Rick. The tension between them crackled like a live wire. I'm giving you one chance to do the right thing, return the ring to Mr. Parker, and we all walk away, Dwayne said, his voice low and controlled, the kind of voice that commanded attention. For a long, tense moment, neither man moved. Then, in a flash, Dwayne lunged forward, his hand striking with the precision of a trained fighter. Rick barely had time to react before the ring was out of his grasp, Dwayne already turning to hand it back to Henry. Here you go, sir, he said, his tone gentler now as he placed the ring in the elderly man's trembling hands. Henry's fingers clutched the ring tightly, his eyes welling with emotion as tears streaked down his withered face. Thank you so much, he whispered, holding the ring against his chest as if afraid to lose it again. Rick took a step back, his jaw tightening as the reality of the moment sank in. He was outmatched. But instead of backing down, his eyes darkened with defiance. A sneer curled on his lips as he pulled out his phone. You think you've won? He spat. Let's see how tough you are when you're outnumbered. He quickly dialed a number, his voice dropping into a menacing growl. Bear, it's me. Get the boys. We've got a situation. Dwayne's jaw tightened as he exchanged a glance with Henry. The peaceful resolution he had hoped for was quickly slipping away. But Dwayne wasn't a man who relied solely on strength, he was a strategist. He knew that sometimes, violence wasn't the answer. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a few bills and held them out toward Rick. Look, he said, voice calm, measured. This doesn't have to go any further. Here's more than enough for your coffee, take it and walk away. For a brief second, Rick hesitated. His eyes flickered between Dwayne's face and the cash in his hand. Then, just as quickly, his expression hardened. Spitting on the ground, he snarled, You think you can buy me off? This isn't about coffee anymore. It's about respect. Dwayne sighed, his shoulders relaxing slightly, but only in resignation. The fight was unavoidable. As if on cue, the deep, menacing rumble of motorcycle engines filled the air. The ground seemed to tremble beneath them as multiple bikes roared onto the scene, their headlights cutting through the dust. Within moments, a gang of bikers surrounded them, their presence transforming the quiet dirt path into something resembling a battlefield. They formed a tight semicircle, cutting off any chance of escape. Then, from the center of the group, a towering man stepped forward, his presence alone commanding immediate respect. "I'm Mitch Bear Reynolds," he announced, his deep, gravelly voice filled with authority. His sharp eyes studied Dwayne for a moment, squinting as if trying to confirm something. Then, suddenly, recognition dawned on his face. "Well, I'll be damned, it really is you, The Rock." Dwayne didn't miss a beat. He saw his opening and took it. "Nice to meet you, Bear," he said, keeping his voice even. Then, with a nod toward Henry, he added, "Your guy here has been harassing this man, an elderly veteran. He fought for our country, and he doesn't deserve this kind of treatment." A murmur spread through the gathered bikers, their once hostile expressions shifting into something more curious, and even a little impressed. Bear's expression darkened as he turned toward Rick. "You called us out here, over a spilled coffee? Against a veteran?" Rick, suddenly looking a lot less confident, swallowed hard. It's not what it looks like, Bear." "Save it," Bear cut him off, his voice dripping with disgust. Then, before Rick could react, Bear reached out and ripped the leather vest from his shoulders, stripping him of his gang colors. "You're out," he growled. "We don't tolerate this kind of behavior, not toward anyone. And especially not toward a man who served our country." The other bikers nodded in agreement, their expressions hardening in silent disapproval. Rick stood there, frozen, his bravado completely gone. Stripped of his vest, his status, and his gang's protection, he looked small. Realizing he was defeated, he let out an angry curse under his breath before storming off toward his motorcycle. The aggressive rev of his engine sent a final echo of frustration through the air as he sped off, disappearing into the distance. A heavy silence lingered in the aftermath. Then, Bear turned back to Henry, his expression softening slightly. "Mr. Parker," he said, his voice now carrying something that almost resembled respect, "on behalf of our group, I apologize for any trouble that idiot caused you." Henry, still processing the whirlwind of events, blinked. Then, to everyone's surprise, he let out a chuckle. "Well," he said, rubbing his chin, "that was a hell of a lot more excitement than I expected on a coffee run." Dwayne smirked, his arms crossing over his chest. "Not exactly how I thought my morning would go either." And then, something no one expected happened. Bear grinned, glancing at his fellow bikers before looking back at Henry. "Tell you what, Mr. Parker, how about we give you a proper escort home?" Henry's eyes twinkled with mischief and adventure, something long dormant coming alive again. "You know what?" he said, a smile slowly forming on his lips. "I'd love that." Moments later, Henry found himself riding with a biker gang, gripping Bear's waist as they roared down the road, his wheelchair securely strapped to another bike. For the first time in years, he felt truly alive. As the wind whipped past him, Henry laughed, the sound lost in the hum of the engines but vibrating through his chest. His thoughts drifted to Clara, his late wife. "Clara," he thought, a bittersweet smile forming. "You wouldn't believe the day I've had." With a newfound sense of adventure, he knew this would be a story he'd never forget.